All right. Thank you. I think that is about, there you go. That's the slide. We're going to talk about the pathway to addiction and how to enjoyably lock yourself into a prison, slavery. Wouldn't we all like to learn how to do that? No, we would not. We would not. We'll talk about addiction today and further develop this idea of why is it we have this sense that we cannot quit what we know we shouldn't be doing. Now, I should probably clarify when I use the word addiction, I'm meaning a habitual behavior that is at the very far extreme edge of what you are challenged with, and that it's impossible to break free from your own efforts. Now, there are some bad habits that you will find that you do not need divine intervention to do the right thing necessarily. Of course, that's different for every person. But then there are true addictions which require deeper interventions, shall we say. And we're going to look at that a little bit more closely today, while acknowledging that there is also a spectrum of addiction, of addictive behavior. I think a lot of us, myself included, and the sister described a little bit just a bit ago, our own experience of feeling this powerful drive to eat what we want. And there can be food addictions, true. But not everybody goes that far in their relationship with food. That's just one example of something that you may find that you have a struggle with, being able to give up something. But there are other illustrations. For example, have you ever picked up your phone to just check one thing? But suddenly it's 1 hour later. But I was just going to do one thing. I'm still here. Why can't I just put it down? Maybe it's food. Want to put away the Cheetos. Something. Maybe it's a drink, like Dr. Pepper. That at the hospital, people walk by and say, see, I am just what the doctor ordered. Maybe it's some substance, illicit or legal, that you have experience with that you wish you could break off. But what if I told you that no matter what your substance of choice or food or technology experience is, on the inside of your mind, in your head, internally, despite the external labels we might give to somebody, the process is very, very similar, giving you the same internal experience that you crave once these triggers or cues enter your daily routine, and that drives your behavior. So I've put this figure together to show the relationship of these things that swirl in your life that lead to you learning a particular behavior that is very difficult then to break. It starts with those cues or triggers. This craving experience is set up on the inside of your mind. It drives certain behaviors, might be seen on the outside as your relationship to food or your phone or a computer or a porn addiction. It might be seen as injecting substances into your veins, scarring your hands. All the external trappings or labels we might give to somebody can be misleading when really we're all seeking the same experience on the inside of pleasure and reward, which is the fourth circle I have on the screen now. And we're going to go through these things, and I will use the more socially acceptable addictions, like food or media, to discuss these areas with you today. knowing that all the others apply as well, such as gambling or heroin. It's all the same principles, and we'll go through those together. And I want to show you today a way of changing this figure. I want you to look at that figure and maybe memorize it. And then I'm going to change it to a figure that will help you remember maybe some strategies to help you with solutions to helping you break out of addiction. And of course, I'm going to close at the end with the realization or the teaching point that Jesus, the master physician, is the one who's going to be breaking addictions. But as they pointed out earlier, resistance is not futile. The Bible tells us to resist the devil because then he will what? Flee from him. Not because he's scared of you, but because by resisting, you align yourself with the powers of heaven that rescue you. But there are some hacks, shall we say, or rescue strategies that I'm going to share with you this morning to help you. So let's talk about this pathway or mechanism of addiction that you are going to suffer if you go too far down that pathway in your choices. What happens in your mind is this spike of dopamine. I think most people these days have heard that word, that neurochemical called dopamine, sometimes pleasure chemical. And so I have on the screen 3 examples of things that will spike your dopamine levels. I mentioned social media or the use of the phone. Food does this. Drugs have this effect. But they do it in different ways. So in social media, the parts of that interaction you have with social media that causes the dopamine levels to spike are these intermittent rewards, the thumbs up that you might receive on a feed, or the likes that people send your way on your channel. It could be simply the novelty that your mind is seeking if you have a curiosity built into you, like most people do, a curiosity or a wonderment of things about, actually, women particularly are driven by mystery, the wanting to know the unknown. This is actually what was driving Eve in the very beginning, to know things that she didn't know. Novelty is a powerful driving force that is related to the dopamine reaction in the brain. When it's involving food rather than social media, the sugars and fats, salts to a degree as well, are used to combine together to signal the brain these pleasurable releases of neurochemicals. There are actually food scientists. I was a chemist initially, and I looked at doing food chemistry for a career. I'm glad I didn't, because I would probably currently be involved in creating combinations of food that create an addictive type response to ensure brand loyalty and repeat purchases of foods that are not healthy. So you can design foods with flavors and ingredients that will amplify the signaling in your brain that leads to an addictive type of behavior. Drugs, of course, it's easier to just kind of directly or very closely or slightly indirectly stimulate dopamine levels. Cocaine, for example, will inhibit the reuptake or recycling of dopamine, and that in itself then will raise dopamine levels higher than they would otherwise be. So those are kind of how the dopamine is being triggered by the behaviors you select for yourself. What will happen next, though, because these levels of dopamine are spiking much higher than the average baseline levels that would occur in activities of daily living, what will happen at the molecular level might be in a way compared to if the audio system were to suddenly be, if our team suddenly turns up the volume and it starts to get really, really loud and maybe the feedback occurs, this howling volume will tend to cause people to do this, right? You reflexively kind of cover your ears to protect yourself from overwhelming signals coming in. Your body does that by down-regulating and building a tolerance to these spikes of dopamine. So this chronic stimulation that you will trigger by your behavior will lead to a decreased sensation in the future to the same signals. And when people get deeper into addiction, they are not commonly not uncommonly found to report that nothing feels good in life anymore. And that's because they've just hammered their receptors to death almost, and their brains begin to look like the ones on the right. I have a figure there showing normal control brains on your left with various rainbow-like colors lighting up the inside of their coconut. Whereas on the right side, the addicts to cocaine, meth, alcohol, heroin, and you could line up all kinds of other addictions on that right-hand side, where you do not see really any red or yellow colors. And that's because they have low levels of dopamine receptors, because the body has responded to their addictive type behaviors by turning down the gain and getting rid of some of those receptors. And so it makes you feel depressed and like flat, and nothing really matters in life anymore. Okay, so that's the second step or part of the mechanism of this addictive loop. A third step is what is referred to as a sensitization or oversensitization to these triggers or cues. They become much more powerful later on than they did at the very first time you were exposed to, say, smoking, or your first alcoholic drink, or your first hit of an illicit substance. These become increasingly powerfully able to drive your behavior because the craving is going up. The notifications when the phone dings become much more, you become much more in tune to them. They're, oh, I've got an email, I've got a message, somebody texted me. Things like that become much more seemingly important to you. It might be that the taste or smell of a certain food or substance becomes much more drawing to you, and you're less able to resist than you did in times past. There can even be times of day or locations, geographic locations, or an emotional state that will trigger these type of pathways. We call this cue sensitization. A more serious problem, in my opinion, that occurs in these cycles, pathways, circuits, is impairment of your prefrontal cortex. The frontal lobes have a reduced ability to inhibit your behavior. There's a loss of inhibition, which in plain English would be a lack of self-control. Because self-control is seated there in the frontal lobes, those abilities, the capabilities to refrain from doing something when you suddenly get this impulse to do something maybe out of character, or something that you don't want to do even though it is in your character. You can no longer make good decisions under stress because the judgment and the forethought and the pre-planning that the prefrontal cortex area of the brain is responsible for, it's been, in a way, impaired and damaged. That then allows those quicker circuits I pointed out yesterday at the base of the brain in the basal ganglia, those can run amok because they're no longer having to compete with the higher centers in the prefrontal cortex. They get to have their way because they act quick and easily with low energy requirements, whereas the prefrontal cortex now isn't working well. It's taking more time, it's taking more energy to exhibit self-control or exercise judgment. And this creates in the addict a nature that is prone to relapse into repeatedly doing the same things again and again, though they know they're wrong. And they become quite impulsive because their self-control is degrading and sometimes even disappearing. And so finally, and I had hinted to this as I was pointing to the base of my brain, as the prefrontal cortex function declines, the basal ganglia circuits and those pre-programmed loaded behaviors begin to dominate human behavior. And you shift from goal-directed rational action to an automaticity that is less recognizable as human and more animal-like, more mammalian or reptilian. And that is why you will continue to do things without thinking, even though if you're given sufficient time and reflection, you know that those things are bad for you. Let me put this figure back up again, make sure you understand. There's the triggers and the cues. Dopamine creates this craving experience that drives the behavior or actions you choose to do. And it does lead to this reward or sense of pleasure that's much higher than usual. And the brain learns then that if I do this, I experience this. And so you're teaching yourself to do what is wrong for the wrong reasons, because they're emotional reasons or pleasurable feelings of pleasure drive your behavior, and your decision-making ability declines over time. So what should we do about this? Well, this is the figure I told you I was going to put up that's modified a little bit. I kept the colors to kind of help you kind of correlate these strategies, or I mean, think of it as maybe a treatment, not really a treatment, but a strategy to break up and inhibit what has been going on in the past in your brain. If you've been suffering from these triggers or cues, what you're going to want to do then is to either eliminate the cues, like don't drive to Hardee's or Wendy's, or weaken them. Somehow weaken or eliminate them, because then that's going to impact or decrease the craving activation and reduce the number of times where your basal ganglia is automatically starting these programs that you have in your brain that drive those bad behaviors. We're going to think of ways to weaken or reduce the cues. Then, of course, we'll increase rather than decrease the friction and making bad choices easy. We want to increase the friction to try to break the automaticity that's occurring in your brain and help you move back away from the habitual, quick, thoughtless actions. Move your decision-making back to the executive session up here in your prefrontal cortex and give it a little bit of time and a little bit of energy to resist, and hopefully give you time to make a better, different decision. Now, finally, and this is very important, you need to start replacing the reward. And as you think of things you can do to replace the reward that these bad behaviors are giving you, you must deliver, you must consider that your new actions have to deliver a similar, maybe not equivalent, but some type of similar emotional internal payoff rather than just some healthier behavior. The way I tended to explain this and relate it to others in the past is I used to, and I still do, but I used to really love a good big bowl of French vanilla ice cream. But to give that up, I cannot just replace that bowl with a healthier option like kale. I do love kale, and I grow kale, and I eat my own kale. But if I'm going to be sitting eating a meal and the desserts come out and somebody slides that bowl of ice cream in front of me with a big spoon, and I realize, oh, you know, as a lifestyle medicine doc, I can't be eating this. And I'm looking to replace that behavior with something better, and you just slide into my, you pull that ice cream away from me, and suddenly this equivalent sized bowl of raw kale is in front of me. That's good, that's a better behavior, but the emotional payoff that I get from, you know, 8 or 9 leaves of kale is nowhere near the payoff I get if I eat, you know, 3 cups of French vanilla ice cream. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say is the more powerful and bigger the reward that the bad behaviors are giving you, the more challenging it's going to be for you to come up with something similar or equivalent that's going to make it a little more tolerable for you to say no to that previous bad behavior. Did that make sense? And so I try to explain that because it is very important to replace the reward properly. Otherwise, you relapse. You're going to relapse. All right, so I'm going to run through that three-stage strategy, a set of three strategies for a food example, and then we'll do it for a media addiction type scenario, and we'll apply the principles. So typically a loop for some food where you have a cue, then there's craving, the behavior and reward would go something like this. At the end of a long day, there's this fatigue that we all experience after being up for 18-ish hours. And maybe you walk into the house, there's the TV, media addiction perhaps, that would complement your food addiction. The kitchen is right there next to the living room. Maybe there's some leftovers out. So these are the cues that trigger, oh, it's time for me to eat, even though it's really too late to be eating. The craving what you're really craving is some degree of comfort after being uncomfortable and stressed for the day. And so that cue and the craving triggers the behavior of snacking and eating those high fat or sugar content, prepackaged, ultra high processed killers, food-like substances that we have. And the reward that you get, of course, and you've all had it, as have I, is this really quite quick feeling of relief that the dopamine spike gives you, and finished my day on a low note. So that's your typical loop. And what are we going to do? What's the rescue protocol I might suggest you consider or work on, develop? You don't have to do it this way. These are suggestions, something for you to start working with. Let's remove the cues. Let's decrease or remove the cues. What are we going to do? Okay, well, get rid of this line of sight ability you have when you walk in your house to suddenly see these things. You don't want food out on the counters. If they're there, maybe consider some opaque containers for the food so you can't like see it visually. You might want to store some of this stuff on the high shelf where you have to go find a stool or a chair to get up there. I mean, we do this to our kids, right? You put the cookie jar or the snacks on top of the fridge when they're 3, 4, 5 years old because you know they can't get up there. But you ought to try some of those strategies for yourself if you're really struggling. You might consider turning off the lights after eating, immediately leaving the kitchen, shutting that down like it's a restaurant. Like my kitchen is a restaurant. It's closed for business. I don't go in there because they're not open after a certain time of day. So go have something else to do. I'm going to go brush my teeth. I'm going to enter another business section of my house and go brush my teeth. I might have rules where I disallow eating outside my kitchen. So if I can just physically not be in the kitchen, even though I'm on the couch or near the computer, laptop, or TV, maybe I'm in bed, the rule is, I'm the king of the castle. My rules are, food is not consumed outside the kitchen. So these cues, I try to keep them away from me to spread them out. Now, we want to increase the friction, right? We want to make the, didn't RFK say this? We want to make the healthy decision the easy decision. All right, so we also make the bad decision the hard decision. We increase the friction. We have a 10-minute rule, perhaps, before you can satisfy these, whatever urge it is, but media or food. When this urge hits you, you can set a timer or have some type of delay. You can create a mandatory pre-action step, like before I eat, I'm going to drink a full glass of cold water first because now I know I have to wait 30 minutes, right? It'd be good. And so you delay, you put off things. What this is doing is buying some extra time for your prefrontal cortex to come back online and say, hey, wait a second, we can't be doing this. Whereas the basal ganglia would say, yes, we can, and we can do it right now. No, I'm going to slow things down, generate some delay. You can interrupt with physical activity. Like, okay, well, before I have this Reese's, I'm going to go walk around the hospital 2 times or do 20 push-ups or squats or something to, again, delay the execution of these pre-programmed loops in your head, because they may just actually go away while your higher powers engage with something that's more important. That doesn't always happen, but it's a strategy. You can consider maybe incorporating this into your personal rescue protocol. Now, replacing the reward. This is a little more difficult. These are some ideas you can try. The first part of replacing a reward is actually identifying carefully what the reward is. You know, that scenario I gave earlier, just a bit ago, about the long day, right? The reward is not the food, the candy bar, or the ice cream. You're rewarding. I'm going to reward myself with this. That's not the reward. The reward was the stress relief. That was really what your body and mind was seeking. The mechanism you gave it was food. And while it felt as though that was rewarding, that was not really what internally you were seeking. You were seeking stress relief. And so it'd be good to consider how you might replace with low friction alternatives that contain emotional equivalencies these other things that you think are rewarding. You know, the soothing warmth of a nice herbal tea and the ritual of ending a day peacefully. That would be a very good reward for a stressful day, in my opinion. It may be that a change of state or location out in the woods or the backyard or a nearby park, perhaps if you live by one, for just a 5-minute or 10-minute walk to decompress after that stress is built up on you throughout your day might be helpful. I would probably recommend you combine all these. If you have any stress level like I do, it's not, a couple herbal tea is not going to cut it, right? Kind of like the kale with the ice cream, right? You're going to have the tea, go for a walk, hit the shower, which is a nice, strong sensory reset for you with some nice hot cold. I would probably do a lot more hot to de-stress myself. And then rather than going through some emails or messages that are trickling in at the end of the day that are all related to those stressful things you dealt with, skip that and maybe do an audio book or spend some time with your Bible or a good Bible lesson or sermon online, and maybe some light stretching or exercise with some soothing music at the end of your day. You know, we used to try to, I haven't, but maybe you have, trying to put your children to bed with some nice soothing music. You know, it works at 2 months of age just as easily as it would at 22 or 42 years of age. But the warm bath, soothing music, the quiet, the decreased light level, all these things that we learn to do with children are actually still effective after we grow up. But you may have to combine them to get the type of level of reward that will be experienced at the neurochemical level in your brain with a combination of these less intense or less potent rewards. All right, let's go through a social media example. Typical loop that takes you from the trigger of the cue through a craving to a behavior and the reward hit would be some notification comes up. Maybe it's an email you get, maybe it's the ding of a text, or the flow of the hearts or the thumbs up coming on a stream. So the notification might be a cue for you. It might be that boredom is a cue. When you're bored, you're seeking something to fill your day and you're bored. Social media may be something you use to fill that void of your day. I find that it's the micro pauses that capture me. It's like it's when I'm standing at the checkout line at the store, and it's only going to be like 60 to 120 seconds, and then it's my turn to like pay and do this transaction. But I've got nothing to do, right? So I reach at the hip where my cell phone is, and I tell myself, oh, well, I'm being efficient with my time. I'm going to answer some of these emails or messages, and I start scrolling, and then I'm sucked into this thing because this little micro pause occurs during my day that I've trained myself to fill that silence, that inactivity with useful activity on my phone, right? No. And I'm a curious guy, so the internet or social media, I find stimulating. I can learn all kinds of things. It's novel. Newness is all out there. When I was a kid, I would read encyclopedias in my spare time at school. When I'd finish my work, the teacher would let me go pull out like the S of the encyclopedia, and I'd just like flip through it. And I still do the same things. I just do it on my phone rather than a book. And so this drives our behavior to open up these apps, to turn on the phone, do this and the other, and we get the reward of this dopamine hit. So let's run through a rescue protocol for Dr. Kobos and his media. Well, remove the cue. I learned this recently. Does anybody know about the grayscale mode on their phone? It is ugly. It's under the settings. Ask Siri, which is what I did, and she'll take you through the steps. And it turns your glorious iPhone that's this, colorful, delightful thing to look at into like the black and white screen I saw when I was a kid in the 70s. Black and white TV, before color TV. It wasn't as enjoyable back then. And so you can do that with your phone. And so you pull it out and it's this ugly grayscale. And it's like, I don't want to use it anymore because it's just not that pretty, not so fun. Try the grayscale mode. It's very discouraging to use a phone with grayscale. You may choose also to disable all the non-essential notifications. Ask Siri for help on that too if you've never done that. I've done this. If you move those tempting apps off the home screen, then they're not the first thing that you see when you open up your phone. It's less likely that you're going to go down that rabbit hole because it's not readily visible. So not only do you move them off the home screen, you put them on the last screen and inside a folder. So you have to go like swipe, 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 tap there. And again, you're slowing things down a bit, removing the cues, and making it harder to do what's wrong. Or maybe not what's morally wrong, but doing something that's going to waste more time than you have. You can also physically separate from your phone. This is particularly helpful when you're eating your meals, when you're at work, unless, of course, you use the device to do your work. School time, lock it up for bedtime. I've often thought it'd be nice to have a bed for our devices that you put your device to bed and it charges because you need to put yourself to bed and you need to recharge. Maybe I can make money on that. Make a phone bed. I'll make a phone bed. Okay, how do we increase the friction? Well, I used to have a log out. After every 5 seconds, my phone would go dark and I get logged out. I also don't use my face as a way to unlock the phone. I have to manually put in a 6-digit code. And I got so tired of it, I don't use my phone so much anymore because it's just inconvenient. You could also have your own written, personal, intentional entry rules so that before I open up an app or a phone, I have to ask myself a security question, which is, what am I here doing? What did I just open this app for? Or you have a delay trigger. So I have to pause and count to 5 before I touch that app. Again, this increased friction disallows the automaticity of the basal ganglia circuits to drive the behavior before the prefrontal cortex has the time and energy to say, wait a second. What are you doing? Why did you come here? Weren't we supposed to be? Oh, okay, yeah, all right, you're right. Okay. And it gives you a chance. Doesn't guarantee it. Gives you a chance to resist before resistance is futile. All right, sorry, this is a little bit harder to read. I should have broken this into 2 slides. But I want to talk about replacing the reward. Again, we would need to identify the real reward, which is not the content you're going to find on your TikTok feed or social media feeds. It's not the content. It's the novelty, the stimulation, the escape from whatever stressors are in the real world by going to a less than real world, one that maybe you have control over, one that you find more interesting. So to replace these, you might suggest, if you're like me and you're interested in world events because they relate to prophecy, you want to use news apps to limit your exposure to the news stories. Some people have stories delivered to them or curated rather than going to CNN.com or FoxNews.com and just endlessly scrolling to see more and more and more and more stories. To limit your access, you might not eliminate it. And if, like me, you're just interested in interesting, different, novel, stimulating things, pick an app that will teach you a foreign language, Duolingo or something like that. And rather than having this unlimited supply of dopamine stimulating activities, you can pick more well-defined, shorter things to look at or read, rather than, as I mentioned earlier, this infinite scrolling that can occur on many sites, because there's just no end to it. They just continually feed you stuff. You need to find something that's not infinite. And if you're a gamer, you need a game that is bounded and has some limits, like a puzzle. You can start a puzzle and it finishes. It's done. Something that's more well-defined, or a game that has a set of rules that takes you to the end of the game, rather than something that just keeps going and going and going. And you jump in online, the game is always going, there's always people around the world playing this, and you can come and go limitlessly. Seek also for higher quality newness, not just newness for newness' sake, but high quality newness, and looking for maybe long form rather than short YouTube stuff that is going to lead you to keep clicking, keep clicking, keep clicking. There's some rescue protocols you can use for the food type scenarios and the social media type scenarios on your laptop or your handheld device. I want to identify with you the 3 top common reasons of failing or relapsing or continuing to do things that you know is wrong. Number 1 reason I'll give you is trying to rely on willpower alone. That's because your willpower alone is typically going to fail you under stressful circumstances. And if you're like me, you live in a stressful world. And so you're just asking to fail if you just try to grit your teeth or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I think yesterday I explained a little bit more about why it is that motivation, willpower, and knowledge alone are just not going to save you once you go down the side of the spectrum of addiction that's a little bit deeper than average. Number 2 is trying to remove bad behaviors that give you this emotional reward without replacing that reward with something nearly or substantially rewarding in itself. That was the ice cream kale example I gave you. We need to offer somebody something better for that type of replacement to be effective. Because if you don't, this is setting people up for rebound or relapse, and maybe even a worse substitution for an addiction. I learned this from an addiction specialist in Knoxville, kind of down the road from where I'm stationed at, when I think it was he explained that it's come to the point where they don't, because they're specialists, they don't struggle too much in breaking an addictive behavior. You can get good at it, actually, as a medical professional. The trouble was that breaking an addiction doesn't necessarily change the addict. They're still an addict. And so they will readily go find something else, and they're addicted to that now. And it may be a worse addiction than they had before. That has to do with their identity, right? Their identity. I'm an addict. It may be also that we too are a little bit overly ambitious with our changes at first, and you can overload the brain, and the system collapses and it falls back into the old rut. And so one of the books that I might recommend would be Atomic Habits. There are kind of 2 strategies for breaking bad habits. One is to do so a little bit at a time. That's what the Atomic Habits talks about. These small micro changes that over time lead to large behavioral differences over time. That's one way. Many people find that very effective. Some people find the more dramatic, radical changes that occur suddenly to be more successful strategies for them. You have to determine what's right and best for you. Some people are more like a military boot camp kind of person where they get crushed and with the radical sudden changes and their life is never the same and they go off to something great. Others have to be kind of more baby steps over a longer period of time, a little kinder, gentler routine is successful for them. I don't know who you are. You'll have to discover that for yourself. I want to give you these two Bible promises that are very, very important because, like I said earlier, these are kind of just little strategies or life hacks that will assist and aid you, but in no means guarantee success. They're just aids that I want you to understand and have with you once you understand what's going on inside your brain with these loops and cycles. But the true success is found with the master physician. And these are the promises that he gives us that can rescue us in all situations. We are given exceeding, not just nice or great promises, but exceeding great and precious promises. And that these are the keys through which we can be partakers of a divine nature, which currently I don't enjoy a divine nature. I want to receive it. And these promises are mechanisms of action by which God can change who I am through the process of the plan of redemption. This is how we can escape these corrupt behaviors that we have brought on ourselves through our own bad decisions. Recall that there is no temptation that we face that others haven't faced before, and that it's not our faithfulness in sticking with a protocol. It is God's faithfulness who will not suffer us to be tempted above what he sees us able to handle, because he gives with the temptation. The devil is tempting us. The God of the universe can step in and give with those temptations a way to escape, so that indeed ye may be able to bear or escape the corruption that is in the flesh. Is that clear? So I don't want to offer you solutions that aren't guaranteed to work. These are solutions. These Bible promises are the solutions that are guaranteed to work. And we could take time to show you my favorite Bible promises, but I encourage you to go find the ones that work for you, the ones that you find you can hide in your heart, that you might not sin against God, right? That's Psalms 119, verse 11. Right? So there's going to be a list that you need to come up with for your tool belt that you can pull out, like Jesus did when he was in the wilderness, pulled out Bible verses to help fight temptation. All right, I believe that's where let me also just add this one. Luke 18:27. The things which are impossible with men are what? Possible with God. So there are impossible addictions people will talk about. And in a sense, they are. But in another sense, they are not. It depends on whether or not you want to connect with the master physician and your creator, or choose a different physician who might have credentials from a very prestigious institution, but with them, it's going to be impossible. Right? So you want to connect with a physician with whom all things are possible. All right, I actually do have just enough time left to tee some things up for my colleague, Dr. Kelly, who will be teaching a session this afternoon. So I rushed through that so I could get to a couple interesting slides that actually are a full presentation or two on its own. I want to highlight some things that I think will dovetail nicely with what John is going to say this afternoon. Are you familiar with this phrase, another Jesus and another gospel? Have you read that anywhere? You will find it in the scriptures. Paul talks about another Jesus. He talks about another gospel. It's in 2 Corinthians and in Galatians. Go look these up. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I want to move to the next, 5 slides before I finish. But Paul does talk about another Jesus that he does not encourage people to receive or accept, because it comes with another gospel, a false Jesus and a false gospel. And Paul says that if you hear any other gospel or any other Jesus come to you, let that one be accursed. Because that's not what I was taught, and it's not what I'm teaching you. This idea of another Jesus and another gospel is not a large theme in Scripture, but it is mentioned. And so I want to mention to you that because there is another gospel and another Jesus, it is possible to do other gospel medical missionary work. You don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And I want to give you a quick overview of what the two main systems of healing and gospel work are that I've picked up as I've circulated in both systems myself. The typical system you're going to see on the right, on the left, that I see in world-class institutions in this nation and abroad, the tertiary medical care system of allopathy is of limited access. It is very dependent on pharmaceuticals and drug use. It is very high-tech, and if you've noticed, if you've received any of it, it's very high cost. You may receive misinformation in your treatment plan, or you may have uninformed consent, because consent is required in this system. You may find it characterized by medical mandates, but a nice convenient feature is that it takes little to no effort or cooperation on your part. That's part of why it's very popular. Your outcomes that you get in typical healthcare are achieved independent of your belief in them. It doesn't matter whether you believe your antihypertensive pill is going to work or not, it will do the job. And your diseases are typically treated by lifelong management of symptoms. And all the glory and gratitude will typically go to humans. This is virtually the polar opposite of gospel medical missionary work, where anybody can have access to it. There's very low, if any, drug requirements to engage in it. Maybe some exceptions might be insulin if you're a type 1 diabetic, or if you've had your thyroid removed, you might want some thyroid medication. It's very low tech and low cost to be at a wellness location. It's characterized by very well-informed consent. You get to choose without any coercion or manipulation. Your cooperation is definitely needed. You might even have to check into a residential program, and that requires a lot more cooperation. Your outcomes depend upon faith and belief in the master physician, who can either reverse or cure your diseases. And having done so, the gratitude and glory goes to divinity. All right? Now, notice also some very similar elements within a false gospel and a false system of healing. On the one side, with the tertiary medical care system, with limited access through physicians and gatekeepers, the false gospel has pastors and priests who are able to lock you in or out of their system. You have to have a prescription or permission to have the drugs that you get from the pharmacy, just like you might have to have permission from a priest or a pastor to engage in the services of the local church. The high tech and high cost is reflected in the false system of gospel by having to donate a lot of money to your famous online pastor or priest. You might be given misinformation or uninformed consent to engage in the healthcare. And on the gospel side, you might have restricted access. In the Middle Ages, couldn't even have a Bible. You might have misinterpreted versions of the scriptures presented to you before you consent to that gospel. That gospel may include coercive actions, maybe an inquisition for several hundred years, and it's very well reflected in false systems of healing with medical forced mandates. There's a very similar set of behaviors or principles going on with a false gospel and a false system of healing. In the healing, there's really little to no effort or cooperation needed in your sickness to get treatment. On the false gospel side, you're going to hear that your sinful nature is just part of your state of being and you can never get rid of it or overcome it. And so you're going to sin until you die or until Jesus comes. And your disease basically then is treated with forgiveness in this life and cured maybe after you're dead or in heaven. just like in a false system of healing, your disease is never really eliminated. It's just managed or treated with lifelong medication and prescription medication given to you every 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on when the physician asks you to come back to the the office, to get blessed with their um, system of healing. I find the similarities striking, but maybe I'm just crazy and imagining all of this. You can be the judge. We do still have some free speech and freedom to think and consider what's going on around us, what we think of it, and what we do about it. Okay, let me just close with this, that a misunderstanding of the problem of the disease of sin will determine what solution you seek and how you treat it. It will determine the Jesus from whom you receive that treatment and the type of gospel medical missionary work you yourself offer or receive yourself. You will seek and find a different Jesus, you will accept or reject a different gospel, and you will experience and promote a different plan of salvation. You will practice a different gospel medical missionary work depending on which Jesus or gospel you subscribe to. The real Jesus of Scripture uses a healing ministry to prepare people first to better understand and then to experience his gospel ministry. That's why he linked the two together. What Jesus does physically with his healing ministry in the Scripture stories makes what he proposes to do with his gospel ministry much more believable. I mean, if Jesus can't heal a withered hand or raise the dead, why would you believe that he can forgive your sins? It would be impossible. I mean, if you can't actually heal a leper, why do you think you can cure an adulterer? It wouldn't be believable. And what Jesus says in his gospel ministry, what he says, the truth, the unadulterated truth, identifies his ministry as authentic and authorized by heaven. And when it's a healing gospel ministry, we know that this will be what distinguishes the false healings we anticipate occurring in the latter days as presented in the prophecies of Revelation. That's how you're going to distinguish false healings from true healings. It's what the practitioners say that authenticates and authorizes them as an agent of heaven or an agent of darkness. All right, Brother John, I hope I teed that up well for you for this afternoon. That will conclude my session for this morning. I look forward to hearing more of what John says, because we go back on these ideas a lot over months and years, and we don't always get to spend a lot of time together, so I'm excited to hear what he presents, because I admire the studies that he has done and what he's led me into thinking about and considering and presenting myself. So thank you for your attention.